So Mick, is it absolutely true that you've never bought a pair of shoes for less than $700?
Well, these were $650, and I actually bought them. They're so new, I forgot to lace them up. So I think that knocked off the $100.
You can afford the laces along with the shoes.
The laces are actually $100. I didn't realize that until I got them. It's like an add-on.
Cybersecurity has helped you in your career. Hi, this is Coffee Talk with Serge, and as always, we're relevant and pointless for all the openings that we do. But today, we are joined by very special guests, aren't we, Ms. Audra?
We do. We have Jake Williams here, and he is an instructor at the Applied Network Institute for Applied Network Defense. Is that right? You told me this 5 times.
Applied Network Security, whatever.
Applied Network Security.
It's all
there we
good.
go. It's a mouthful.
Whatever, right?
But that is what you do. We also have Eva with us, and you are the Director of Cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I got that right.
Yes.
The name of that one. So awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us for this episode of Coffee Talk Special Edition, live from .conf
23 in Las Vegas.
As you can tell, we've done a lot of prep beforehand. So.
We gave Jake a hoodie, so I feel like we've prepped enough for this, and Eva has a hoodie on. So really, check, we can go now.
You saw the Vegas weather at 110 plus, and you were like, Jake, put on a hoodie on, right?
You need a black hoodie. It's exactly what you need is the conf hoodie. But I know many a Splunker that would like that hoodie from you. So we'll get back into that. So thanks for coming with us today, and thanks for coming to Conf 23. So because we prepared so well, what would you like to discuss first?
Well, I thought we were going to talk a bit about advanced persistent threats to start, if that sounds good.
Are they real? Do they exist? And have they ever hurt anyone? Jake.
Discuss.
Point on the bear where the APT hurt you.
Oh, on the bear. Is that supposed to be a joke? Okay, gotcha. I'm feeling a little cozy
is it a fancy
today.
bear?
And fancy, yeah.
It would be a cozy one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, so APTs, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about APTs possibly, I don't know, stealing signing keys and then using those for supply chain compromises?
These are the questions, right? There's a lot of debate. Is it an APT? Is it a nation state sponsored? Is it nation state sheltered? Is nation state even something that's not Singapore? What's the deal there?
I don't think nation state's a real thing, right? Like there are states
countries
sponsored.
Are a nation state.
But
do we overuse that term?
But you can't. Okay, it's a nation state, but saying
audience.
this is a nation state actor. Well, what else would it be?
Information security uses the term nation state incorrectly, which is
InfoSec being pedantic.
What?
That doesn't.
No. They're pedantic and also wrong.
Eva is calling it out today.
It is true. They essentially use nation state as just a longer, fancier way of saying country.
Yes.
And these two things are not actually interchangeable. I have a degree in international relations. This was absolutely on the exam. But I also understand that language is always changing and developing, and also that I have thoroughly lost this fight. I might as well show up here and tell you that crypto means cryptography.
Yeah. Wow. That's,
wow. Spicy takes right there.
You're not wrong.
Do you roll your own, though? That's the bigger question.
Oh yeah, also my own mail servers, it's totally fine.
Everything's fine.
I thought you were asking if she was rolling her own cryptocurrency, in which case I'm waiting for an airdrop, baby.
Eva Coin.
Okay. Eva Coin is coming.
Eva Coin.
You heard it here.
It's
DEF CON's in a
coming.
couple weeks. We're going to launch it out.
Made entirely of freedoms.
So is it okay to say nation-backed threat? Or does that sound awkward? Or can we make that a thing?
I've always leaned into it's a sponsored actor.
Well, there's also the state-ignored actors, right? I mean, if you think about most ransomware today, I think we're pretty clear that most of it's Eastern European, right? A lot of it we can attribute pretty conclusively into, Russian Federation space, right? But very clearly state-ignored, right? Because, unless we listen to, Granddaddy Putin, right? Where it's nobody hacks in Russia. I mean,
look, IP addresses come from all over the internet, okay? That's how IP addresses
and they
work.
assess security without sanctions. I mean, now with sanctions. Well,
so,
whatever.
Wouldn't that state ignored be state sponsored? If my policy is to, don't make too much noise, and what was a while back was, hey, these keyloggers don't work if your IP address is in this region.
Well, I don't know. If I ignore this conference, am I a sponsor?
Ooh. We'll have to check our donor
Sponsors
page.
have to come and pay.
That's right.
Well, that answers your question about APTs.
There we go. Ba-dum-bum.
So my next question would be, what do you think has been, aside from the nomenclature, what's been the biggest tradecraft evolution? since you first started, like Baby Jake back at the fort.
Yikes.
What have you like, oh wow, that's super impressive. When did you start saying that about?
Back then, the fort had timber palisades. And
It was actually a cabin,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It was just an
cabin,
actual
yeah.
log cabin.
Yeah, go ahead and call me old again. That's awesome. Obviously not citing anything from the fort, but if we roll back to let's look at Mandiant's APT1 reports, right? They were using a bunch of living off the land binaries, and man, as I look today, we're seeing a bunch of living off land binaries. But seriously, tradecraft evolution, I think probably the biggest one for me is WMI event consumers, right? This is something that the vast majority of our security teams are extremely, or have extreme challenges detecting. So I think that's probably the biggest tradecraft evolution I've seen, at least. Thoughts?
I think for me, the one that keeps surprising folks is the software supply chain side of not necessarily having ever thought of that before. So it's not that the threat didn't exist, it's just that people did not have that in there, and Shared DeGrippo will kill me on this, but the threat modeling, like they hadn't actually looked through this as like, we don't need to worry about this, it's not a real threat, and now they're going, actually we do have to spend time on this, and then they come to the inevitable conclusion of, oh, actually we still can't affect change on this threat, so where do you go from after this?
Well, then Alan Friedman shows up and gives a talk about S-bomb.
Right, that is the answer.
If you say it
Pops
too
out of the
loud, he
box.
apologizes. Yeah, exactly.
S-bomb, S-bomb, S-bomb.
My favorite boring thing to ever talk about is S-bombs. That's fine.
Because he's right.
He's
And
absolutely right. It would
Yeah.
change the world tomorrow if we could have S-bombs.
Well, that
Well,
and Vex, right?
That-
Yeah.
Medical devices, right?
I think, for me, I think the biggest evolution I've seen is hybrid operations. Like espionage is always going to be espionage. It's always going to be there just because it's the nature of espionage. The blended operations where we're seeing more of the human element inside of it, where I don't actually have to compromise your network. I can just, hey man, here's $100, here's a USB key, or I will do bad things to things that you care about if you don't do this.
Right.
And we're seeing a lot of that. And I think that is, to me, has been the biggest evolution is we can rely on both of those now. And now I think it's, you don't see an operation without a human element to it. The other big thing for me technically was, and this goes back to slightly before, I guess after the APT1 report, the Sony compromise Guardians of Peace 2014. When ransomware was deployed at the end, I had never seen that before, where it was just, oh, you and Aramco are having a bad day today. And I think now it's just so commonplace where we've seen sponsored actors, last step will launch that ransomware binary as, cover track.
Oh, absolutely, right? Let's pivot into that, because how many ransomware ops have you worked where you go back and look and identify that indeed it's not ransomware for payment's sake, right? It's ransomware for anti-forensic sake.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
The line between criminals and state-supported or sponsored actors has become increasingly blurry over the years. 10, 12 years ago, you could take a look at a campaign and you could basically go, this is a government.
Cybercrime.
This is just crime.
yeah,
This
yeah.
is crimey crime. This is people
is
who
bad
want to spy
crime.
on
This is
journalists
right.
and activists and therefore are bad. And now we have the same groups doing both things, and that's not unusual at all.
Yeah, and going with ransomware and tradecraft, right? Because recently we've seen ransomware groups leveraging 0 days, right, to compromise file transfer appliances. It was Excellion, we had Go Anywhere, and then Move It as the most recent. So I know that's not APT, but we're talking about higher level tradecraft.
APT capability.
Exactly.
Like it's a 0 day that's being used. And I think it demonstrates that over the course of time, the barrier to entry for
Yes.
cybercrime, not that I've ever been a cybercrime actor, let's be super clear on that, it's gotten so much lower. If this panel doesn't work out, we can go start our own ransomware affiliate when we're done for a couple $100 and some cloud storage.
Well, ransom for
How to say
EvaCoin.
Cobalt Strike without
Right.
saying Cobalt
So-
Strike? Is that the...
But then you have to do tech support, which is literally the worst thing.
I don't know. I've seen some of the ransomware actors. Their tech support is pretty amazing. It is.
You gotta up-level that game. That's a lot more work than the first one, right?
I don't know. I feel like I don't really want to sell software to people who will shoot me in the head if I don't do good tech support.
That's fair. That's yeah. No, that sounds good. I think that's yeah. There's a few countries that
I mean, to be fair, you'd probably get your SLAs lower. So it really depends on what we're looking for.
Oh, so many nines.
But we were
9
talking
millimeters, you mean.
tradecraft, right? And I think another spot on tradecraft that we're seeing increasingly is that threat actors, because of our mass adoption or mass migration to the cloud, right, and particularly SaaS applications, it used to be that a threat actor had to penetrate your network, had to laterally move through your network, hunt down that data in your network, figure out how to interact with your specific implementation of your system, and then exfiltrate that data from, again, your network. And now we're storing all that outside of our four walls, right?
Well, now I'll just pay an access broker for that login and access to your network, and I don't need to do anything to compromise it. So like that move away to cloud is compounded by that.
Well, sure. I mean, there is that, but the threat actor may not even need access to your network to steal your crown jewels, right? Because again, increasingly, we're storing our email off-prem, right? We're storing our customer relationship management databases off-prem.
Well,
right?
not just
this
one
is all
cloud,
SaaS.
it's a multi-cloud environment.
Would you still say the endpoint is still the
move things
weakest
from
link
cloud to cloud to
when it
cloud?
comes
Exactly.
to
It's
cloud
cloud to cloud.
compromise?
What's that? Sorry?
Me? Oh, okay.
Oh, either
Would
way.
You say,
Yeah.
everyone's
Please go
talking.
ahead.
Would you say the endpoint is still the weakest link for cloud compromise?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's still a factor, right? If you can get into
Yeah.
someone, credential theft, right? That could be an access vector, and then you're still compromising an endpoint leading to the cloud.
I was gonna say people,
Yes.
but I would go
we
with
should get rid
endpoint.
of people.
Same
Like-
difference.
As a human rights activist, my position is that we should get rid of people.
Yeah.
It's a bold move that will have zero issues.
I believe that is the AI solution we've seen in every movie, though. We're like, I have a problem. I have a fix for you. We'll just get rid of all the peoples, and then we'll have no more people problems.
No more meat space logging in. You're just good to go.
I do think the endpoint, it becomes everything is reliant on that, right? So you have identity and you have endpoint. And beyond that, it's a lot of noise and things that are just always going to be ever changing. But endpoint is just, that's the last link in the chain, so we have to stop it there.
Yep.
The amount of conversations I've had with people where I've asked them if you fully know who actually has access to your IAM, depending on what CSP, cloud service provider you have, like, oh, who signed up for the account though? Did they ever transfer that over? Do you know who they are? Do you know any of them in the background? Have you actually reviewed the RBAC for your backplane here to see if anyone can get in, who's being targeted or not? Like that's the part that just blows my mind. To your point, like it's absolutely unlimited, unfettered access to these networks, and people can't necessarily define who has that access other than like, oh, well, we have this admin group, but once again, who paid for it? Because I bet you they still have an incredible amount of access you didn't realize.
And it goes back to even building on that, when you have companies, the M&A process. I just bought something. I now own all these assets. YOLO. Like it's I hope they're patched. I hope they were secure.
Right.
So I think that's one of the bigger problems we see is just in the past 6 months, how many companies have bought another company or a company's folded their assets? We see it every day in cyber, or there's a new startup that launches and goes public. All these assets are growing more and more, and that's where I see a lot of the big problems happening is just we bought something because it was cool. Was it secure when we bought it?
Right.
Or what do we do with it now aside from plug it in?
Yep.
That's fair. And then also, shared responsibility model, right? So if you are, on that lift and shift to the cloud, understanding what your responsibility is, what your cloud provider, I think there's a lot of
Okay,
lack
so
of
what's
clarity.
more important? Hot take.
Oh.
What's more important? That SLA agreement with your cloud provider, like I'm responsible for this, you're responsible for this, or understanding the security architecture of that cloud? What's the priority?
But whose responsibility is it to know the architecture?
You're a network defender. You're going to have to know it at some point, right?
¿Por qué no los dos?
I don't even know how that's a hot take, man. It's 100%, 100% the security architecture side, and I'll tell you why. Folks get into this lift and shift all the time without recognizing that with your on-prem, the thing you're lifting from, they lack a control plane, right? And so simple things, right? Like IAM roles, right? Assigned to a given, let's just say EC2 instance, right? Or an Azure Compute instance, that changes the threat model foundationally for that asset running in the cloud versus running on-prem. So it's critical that you understand the security
I
architecture.
don't disagree with you, but I disagree with you.
Okay.
I think the understanding of who is responsible for what is overlooked by many companies. So when something happens, it's, oh, I thought you were going to take care of that because you're my provider.
You're not
We'll
wrong.
have the same argument about MDR versus MSSP.
Well, what about when the companies hide the logs and you can't do your own investigation?
That's different, all right, because late stage capitalism dictates that, no, I think that specific instance, that's going to change. That's going to be a wildly different conversation 3 months from now.
You mean after the congressional hearings?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, pretty
after,
much,
yeah.
right? Yeah. So,
Yeah, when Jenny and the gang from Congress are like, hey, why don't you come by for a little call? I think I think it's awesome because 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this would not have been a conversation. It just would have been, ah, man, that stinks.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the notice that it's getting at the levels that it's getting makes you realize how, hey, cloud's a thing we all have to deal with now.
Yeah.
And it goes back to understanding the service level agreements and who's responsible for
Wah, wah, wah. Well played, sir. Well played.
I think both equally important, but for me, I think it's the understanding of who's responsible. A lot of folks that lift and shift is, hey, we moved to the cloud, not my problem anymore.
So a slight pivot from that. We were talking about this the other week on our coffee talk, and Mick and I have a bit of fatigue around breaches and people's data. And I'm at the point now where I just don't care. It just kind of keeps going on, and everything's been lost, and
You're
there's absolutely
case-hardened.
no help. There's absolutely no future for this, and I just assume as soon as I walk into the Hong Kong airport, there's a reason my passport went red and everyone else's went green. So the hot take that I've ended up coming with is, I guess I've just become, what was the word you used for this?
Case-hardened.
Case-hardened.
Yes.
Yes, I'm absolutely case-hardened on this because I'm no longer impressed or impacted by the number of breaches. So I'm curious, especially with your background, how you've either prevented that or have you drank the Kool-Aid as well of just complete lack of care around people's private data?
Oh, Jesus, no. If you are, for example, a rich white man who works for a private company and you're going traveling.
Who could these people be?
It could be anybody. If you already have a lot of privilege, then yeah, you can just go, my data, YOLO, I'm protected, my life is very
I
comfortable.
have 13 Equifax options. It's wonderful.
It's very fancy. But there are a lot of people for whom a breach of their data has much more serious consequences. People who live not just like paycheck to paycheck, but fraction of a paycheck to fraction of a paycheck. People who are in sort of precarious housing situations, people who are in abusive relationships. And in fact, the further away you are from being a, rich cishet white dude living in the United States, the more likely it is that you will be negatively impacted in a way that you cannot recover from as a result of a data breach. And as a result, it is actually still important to maintain some kind of control of our data.
So how would these folks who are not able to have the same resources be able to actually, when they have a data breach like this, what are they looking at? How are they actually able to overcome that? Or even, are they even given the option? I mean, is there even a place, I'm going to go to the public library, take a day off to go do this and try to get my social security number redone, everything like that? This is where this turns into the bigger issue for this population?
A lot of the time, they are left high and dry. It is extremely upsetting. There is not a lot that they can do when somebody steals their credit card. There's not a lot that somebody can do when somebody steals their identity. And there are a number of really interesting stories out there of people who have been the victims of very persistent identity theft, who have had it ruin their lives. And so if somebody steals your identity, you're probably going to be okay. But there are people who simply cannot recover from that, and we don't have a lot of resources out there to help them.
So I wanted to build on that part. I'm going back to OPM, Anthem, USPS, all these breaches where my PII is just gone now. So I think Ryan and I get to that case-hardened point because
Defeatist attitude. Maybe that's a better word.
I don't think it's defeatist. It's
Nihilist.
I know the
Nihilistic.
response is going to be,
nihilism.
I get 1 year of credit monitoring because that is the least you can do. Like morally and legally, I think that is the least you can do. So, like, that's why I think, why is it a big deal if I know this is all I'm going to get? And the credit monitoring is only if my identity is proven to be compromised. So, clearly that's not the answer. What should we be doing? Like when we see a breach like this, a year of credit monitoring that's a non-starter, right? What's a good baseline for a response?
I wish I knew. I wish I had better answers for you. I can only tell you that what we have right now sucks.
Right. And it is horrible. So I don't know, like, how do we fix that part of it? Like the five of us, our new startup founded, backed by EvaCoin, like how do we fix this problem? Because
Liability.
the credit monitoring,
It's liability.
okay, go.
Yeah, I don't think it's a company decision. I think that's like a legislation, GDPR, US version conversation in our own. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that's much bigger than.
So because we talk about it all the time, like a data privacy law. And, the current restrictions that are in place or the current penalties in place, I don't think are representative of the actual problem or proportional to the actual problem.
We have an opt-out world instead of an opt-in world, right? Because that makes the most sense logically from a company's perspective. You have to opt out of the cookies, right? Instead of opting into the cookies.
We'll have to navigate this ever-changing menu of how to opt out.
The entire model of consent-based privacy is just click-through bullshit. And I think
you got to scroll down sometimes until you can click through.
But seriously, most people don't read this stuff. They are not giving informed consent. And we really need for the companies to bake privacy into their model in the first place because they are frightened of having their pants sewed off if they don't.
So has that horse left the barn?
I don't think it has. I think there's models, for example, in Singapore and in the UK where they work towards incentivize. When they haven't been able to pass legislation, they work towards financial incentives for organizations to do better security around IoT. And I'd be interested to see if models like that could be actually applied as well. I don't think it works without the regulation to also have the penalties, and I think those penalties need to be percentage-based, not static numbers, which then becomes a much, like the IOC or ICO in, yes, not the International Olympic Committee, but the ICO in the UK does it by percentage base up to a large amount, and you can be talking about millions of pounds. And what I like about that, they don't not only fine private sector, but they fine public sector. Because as someone who's had his data lost multiple times by public sector, I really don't feel like I have recourse, where at least then there is a fiscal, now you can also argue this now penalizes a team that is now having an issue where they don't have enough money to do security well, and now they've just got a large fine, which may come out of that, but that's a whole different story. I do think in this case, there are penalties that should be done at a higher level.
And the whole data broker industry, the fact that that's legal to the extent that it is, that could be legislation, right?
There is, in fact, a great deal of appetite for privacy legislation, especially legislation that targets the data broker industry, which is entirely out of control right now. And that's the sort of thing that EFF works on and that I am very excited about. It's hard to get excited about legislation in this sort of deadlocked kind of situation that we have been in for as long as I can remember. I have the cold, dead eyes of a person who has seen a lot of legislation come and go. But I think that there is actually some bipartisan support for strong privacy legislation that's got some teeth. And I'm excited to see it move forward.
Yep, definitely.
I'm trying to think of what that would look like. Like the data brokers, like we've tracked APT groups, we've tracked cybercrime groups, like terrorist groups. You know how to dismantle those, right? Because we're not good at it, but we know how. Like we got a blueprint, roughly. How do you do that with access brokers? Like there's not a centralized repository.
Wait, are we access brokering or data brokering?
Data brokers.
Okay.
Well, access brokers is one thing. Data brokers. There was new legislation just passed in a couple of states, like, hey, we can't sell it. But Ryan and I, we talk about this all the time. I'm not going to buy it. I'm going to lease it. And it feels like that's a loophole that doesn't get discussed enough.
Need to be closed. I mean, at least when I look at this, I think we have a lot of experience in America of shutting down predatory businesses via legislation. We may not always do it well, but we do have that framework. And this, to me, if it's a legitimate company that we're doing this, I think there is legal framework for us to be able to apply it. It just hasn't been put towards that angle, right? But there is precedent here.
I'm sorry. I'm extremely offended that you just used the word legitimate and data brokers in the same sentence, back to back.
Hey, we still have legitimate payday loan brokers.
I thought we were friends.
First I called you old, now I said legitimate. This is going downhill.
But payday loans, oh man.
Yeah. But I mean, on that end, I mean, there's the whole perverse incentive thing we have to think about as well, right? If we legislate away or regulate away, right, the ability for these folks to buy or lease data, don't put it past anybody, right, to hack and leak, right, some data, right, in order to get it in the hands of, in the hands of the people that want it, right?
I mean, if you
But at least the people who are hacking and leaking are definitely breaking the law.
Fair enough, right? Sorry, I meant the hack and leak, right? So it was leaked, but suddenly no one else can find it, but don't worry, the data broker copied it or obtained a copy of it. And again, I'm not the guy that's going to write any of this legislation or regulation, thank goodness, right? But I see a lot of perverse incentives and people trying to thread a needle in different ways, right? To continue the business model that's working.
So going back to legislation, like we're not going to be the folks to write it because there'd be too many words crossed out. We've all been playing this game for a while. We've been working in cybersecurity for a while. I have seen more cyber legislation since I have left the government than my entire career in the government. And that's amazing. Like, you've been at the EFF for a while. You've been on the internet since, founding the internet, you and Al. Are you hopeful for the legislation coming out, or are you like, hey, this is great to talk about it, but I'm not seeing any actual impact or difference?
Oh,
Depends
no.
on the legislation.
Well, let's pause for a second here
Okay.
and note that, look, we're in Vegas, right? I'm not a betting man, but you could have taken any amount of money from me if you'd come to me in, let's say, 2020 and said, hey, Jake, here's the deal, man. You're going to see the words zero trust in an executive order, right? Before the end of the Biden term. You could have taken any amount of money away from me. Again, and I'm just not a betting man. And so the fact that we're there now, right, and we're talking about implementation, not only zero trust, cross-domain solutions, right, in the middle of an executive order.
I've heard S-bomb at least twice and not from Alan, so I feel like we are making steady progress.
Right, we're moving in the right direction. Now, whether the legislation and the regulations that come out of it are any good, that all remains to be seen. But
So interestingly, a lot of the reason why there's suddenly a renewed appetite for regulating the data broker industry is the overturning of Roe versus Wade. It's because a whole lot of data about where people are going and what they're doing and what they're searching for, which may or may not have to do with affecting their pregnancy outcomes, is being collected and sold by data brokers. And so everybody who's trying to find a sort of sneaky way of preventing a future in which law enforcement carries out dragnet surveillance of everyone who could possibly become pregnant in order to imprison them. Everybody who's interested in a future in which we don't do that suddenly is very, very interested in regulating the data broker industry and passing data privacy legislation.
So I think there is a lot of people that still don't realize the impact of everything you just said. Like, because Ryan and I, look, my data's out there, it's gone. But to your point specifically about Roe v. Wade, that data being transferred, and this is just health in general, that I think is a graver cause for concern that I don't think is being given enough attention, because that context is really hard to explain.
I explain it all the time.
So what can I, like John Q. Citizen, what can I do today? Like, write my congressman and say, hey, this stinks, I don't like this?
Well, as it happens, EFF has an entire action center that you can go to that has a list of actions that you can take, including a tool which will write to your specific representative about the legislation which is in front of them urging to take action, whether to stop bad legislation from happening or to help to push good legislation forward. So www.eff.org.
There you go.
Awesome.
I think a big part of it too is thinking beyond yourself, right? Because if you're like, oh, my data's already gone, it doesn't matter, you're thinking very narrowly. But when you think big picture, like what's at stake if things start to devolve even further, then
I think for me,
that
I go
makes
back to the
sense.
legislation a lot. Like without that legislation, then the rest of the conversation, it only goes to a certain point. And to the point I made earlier, I have seen more cyber legislation come out. I am devil's in the details, always is. And I think we're seeing those details slowly trickle down. The National Cyber Strategy that came out, it's a great plan, super ambitious, super prescriptive. Now go to the details of it, and I'm curious what happens 6 months from now, 8 months from now, 10 months from now, when those details come along. Because I think it's always come down to funding. Someone tell me I'm wrong. Like, you're going to have all the best laid plans in the world, the best initiatives in the world, but if I don't have the resources to put that in place, then it's still a non-starter.
I think you've got a secondary issue, though, right? Since we're talking about government, and that's the who ends up with the authorities, right? Because we've seen over our career,
The
spicy
authorities
takes
game,
there,
it's
right?
all right, what, Title 10, 15, 22, like if you don't have it, you're
what
not.
have you. Yeah.
So, and I think, and it's crazy, CISA was 2018 when that got stood up. what they've managed to do in that short amount of time is fantastic, but it goes back to DHS authorities versus cybercom authorities, and most recent talks of like a cybercom type element under the DHS
How
umbrella.
many times do we ask people, is that the FBI's authority, or where's that land again?
Yeah.
What's the FBI doing this versus DHS?
Well, what part of the FBI or other part of the DOJ? Because there's 30 some odd.
When you turn to someone when you turn to DNI generally and say, who has the ball here, right? And 4 different service components raise their hands, you have a problem, right? And so, we start talking about the National Cyber Defense Strategy, outstanding, I love it, right? But to your point, devil's in the details, and there's going to be, let's just call it like we see it here, right? There's going to be a lot of infighting for those valuable dollars. A lot of infighting for those dollars, right? So,
But what about like an operational directive? Because we've seen those where it's like, hey, you just got to improve your enumeration, understand what assets you have, right? We've seen that come from CISA, but that doesn't cost anything, right? I mean,
That
to say,
is
hey,
the
do better.
public sector version of just patch, bro.
Thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers.
But if
Wow.
it's an operational directive, that's I would.
But like ID all your assets, cool. I have been in cyber for 20 plus years. I don't think I've ever worked in any environment where that happened unless it was like the pizza shop with no computers and a cash register.
Is there a way to mandate that where it actually happens without
a way to
dollar?
mandate anything where it actually happens.
I mean,
gotta
unless
come
you
with
want like
funding.
a civilian DODN where the government controls private networks.
DERP. That's the solution.
Yes,
DERP. I don't know if
yes.
you've heard of DERP, Jake.
Derp, no, I don't
Do you
know.
care to
Derp.
explain, Mick?
My idea is, you know how in 2008, the housing crisis, government kind of stepped in, you guys too big to fail, the Troubled Asset Relief Program,
Yeah.
right? So let's say we have a distressed enterprise relief program where your enterprise is not in good shape, you have failed your audits, you have not did your assets, whatever, so you are identified as a distressed enterprise, DERP. And so as being labeled a DERP, the government does step in, assume control, and until you back on your feet. Like we've seen this happen with the airline industry, kind of slightly tangential up 2001, housing industry. So I don't think it's a bad idea, but at the same time, Ryan and I are going back to, hey, this is just giving the government more control over private networks, which historically has not gone well. It's
Well, that's the dirty part. We're not talking about the data brokers as well. Is one of their major consumers is also the government and the federal police forces and
Law enforcement.
Exactly. So as we talk about this, it's also the people legislating are the ones who are buying. I mean, let's look at the NSO group, right? Those were fun outcomes. Like, this is really bad. I mean, we're still going to buy the software, but it's really
like,
bad.
it's horrible
No.
for them.
The U.S. is totally into being outraged about NSO because NSO hasn't been able to break into the U.S. market. Europe, on the other hand, is super outraged but doing nothing, very thoughts and prayers, because they want to continue buying this stuff in order to spy on their journalists and activists. We roll our own, and therefore we can afford to be very outraged.
So that was my take. The earlier legislation came out this year where, hey, the ban on commercial spyware tools, you can't buy them. If you're good, don't you have an in-house team that writes all of your tooling?
Are you trying to resurrect the entire offensive security tooling debate?
No,
Right?
because
that's what it sounds like from where I'm sitting.
I just
mean,
go
I'll
to
go.
offensive tools.
Right?
If I want offensive tools, I just go to the game community 2 years earlier and
Yeah.
take the cheats they're using. I just,
Truth. Right? They are the best rootkit developers on the planet. Your game cheat engine folks, man, your APTs, your fancy bears have nothing on them.
compared to the guy that
Nothing
wants
on
the
them.
free loot. All right,
That's
if
it,
I can
that's
just
it.
get past these microtransactions, I am set.
And it also ties in with encryption too, because there's always that push from maybe a law enforcement perspective of, do we want to?
No,
Right.
it's different because the good guys will only use the backdoors and the encryption.
That is absolutely how a backdoor works.
That's what it's
Exactly.
there for. It's just for us.
You have to
No
label
one
it.
else
As
will
long as you
ever
label it
find
good
out.
guys only. You're fine.
Yeah, good guys will only walk through the good guy door. Bad guys known for their respect of good guys only door.
And they
Totally
don't even know
all
where the
about
door is because it's labeled good guy door and no one can see it but the good guy.
Speaking of good guy backdoors, though, right? I mean, weren't we going to protect those with encryption keys that definitely nobody would steal?
Ever.
Or sorry, acquire.
Oh, good, because
Acquire.
nobody has a history
So-
of stealing keys from the U.S. government.
Or leaking
just the
them.
one
That's
sort of-
never gone
you know.
wrong.
I put them on my
Like, it's a
personal
couple
file share
times.
virus total. Just upload it there and strike
Once, twice.
I've
I
taped them to
mean,
my forehead.
a few bad apples, whatever,
So-
right?
this is getting dark, right? We've all seen some of the worst parts of the cyber field. What are the good things? Let's talk generative AI. How great's that going to be?
Oh, well, why would you do this to us?
I thought we were
Three
moving to
positive
positive
things about
sides here, right? So hallucinations, right? Look, I'm all about efficiency. We clearly need more efficiency in cybersecurity, but folks, before you go and turn over your cybersecurity program to ChatGPT or literally any other generative AI, please research hallucinations, right? Understand what they are and how they can, worst case scenario, impact your network, right? Because look, generative AI using generative AI without that, it's negligence, right? I don't use that word a lot, but it's negligence.
Absolutely. Understanding
yeah.
how data is trained for the large language models, and then also how data is stored and processed through those large language models. I think we have to be cautious about it.
What impresses me the most is that generative AI is wrong a lot. But just the confidence, I read that wrong answer, I'm like, you know what, it does sound pretty right. There's sources. So.
Feels
Don't
very
be
comfortable
Mick.
to me. It feels like something I identify with. there.
Exactly.
It's like blatant confidence, regardless of the right or wrong.
It's mediocre white man as a service.
Exactly. It's been hard to get that on the marketing
Mass.
board, but I'm working on it.
Well, our architecture will reflect that.
Yeah, my mark.
So laying all joking aside, right, case study, I was actually working on a project for a client earlier this year. It's something that I hadn't done in probably 10, 15 years, right? And so, yeah, I used ChatGPT to kind of ask it a question to get me started. I might as well have been asking it to divide by zero. Spent a lot of billable time trying to refine my divide by zero algorithm, which was never going to work, ever. Finally phoned a friend, right? He's like, Jake, you idiot, don't you remember Nyquist's theorem? And I'm like, frantically Googling Nyquist's theorem.
Of course I do, but like for the audience that doesn't remember,
just go ahead and walk through that for me, right? But laying all joking aside, right? You have a serious ethical concern now, or I do at least, right? Do I bill for that time, right? If we're not talking about a consultancy, if you're talking about your employees, and suddenly their performance falls off a cliff because they materially relied on the output of a large language model and it was wrong, whose fault is that? The employee relying on it, the organization who put the loaded gun in their hand and said, please don't, all right?
So what would you say would be the most beneficial application of generative AI today to a security team?
Oh, I think we...
Aside from cool pictures, because the pictures are amazing.
I think we saw it this morning in the product keynote, right? And it's constrained, basically asking for constrained advice or formatting. And what we saw in the product keynote this morning actually was exactly that. It was an analyst saying, I want to do this, but I don't know how to write the query language, right? And there it was, and there's the query language.
Exactly.
I think those examples are where we're going to see really security take that next step. Turning, though, your security decisions over to a large language model is absolutely, it's bananas.
Yeah, when you have like SPL, there's not a lot of uncertainty there, right?
Thank you.
And that's why
Works or it
AI is so
doesn't,
good at
right.
chess.
Yeah.
There are just, straightforward rules of how the game works. I think that's, a safe area for AI. Anything beyond that where there's a level of uncertainty, self-driving cars are a good example of that. That's where it gets a little more tricky, right? So where you have to be more cautious with how you roll that out to the public.
So Eva, one of the questions I had for you, because like I've seen you at DEF CON year after year after year, hanging out at the EFF, hanging out at CTF. What are you most excited about in the next EFF coming out? What's coming out of the EFF next that you're most excited about? Because it seems like every year EFF does something cool with DEF CON. It's just, hey, we're doing this. Hey, there's a new page we stood up. Hey, here's some new policies are written. Hey, here's some new information for you. Like, what's the next big thing coming out for EFF?
Well, Tara Wheeler is going to be running a poker tournament as a fundraiser for EFF, which
More chances to lose my money. I've seen her play.
Yeah.
She is unfortunately very good at poker, but did not think to mask this competence. So it's a trap, but it's a trap, but you're going to fall for the trap anyway.
It's EFF.
That is the essence of InfoSec right there.
Right.
No
I know what
notes.
I'm supposed to do, but I'm not going to do it.
So good. Also, we have a bunch of really interesting campaigns. In the UK and indeed all over the world, there are still lots of efforts to legislate the backdoors to end-to-end encryption, which is the thing that we must continue to fight on all fronts, always, like right-thinking people.
So how many times in your tenure, because I think I've seen it at least 2 or 3, have we seen that, well, someone think of the children, we need backdoors to encrypt,
Well, it used
every
to be,
few years.
why do you love terrorists?
Right, right.
Now it's, won't somebody think of the children? And next, I assume there will be child terrorists.
Ooh, yeah. With generative AI,
Yeah, we were trying to
I
bring
think.
it out of the dark dystopia. Now we've just gone right into child terrorists getting encryption. This is
We're
horrible.
using child labor everywhere else, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't let the terrorists use child labor, the terrorists win.
It's
This is
true.
why I'm against
No?
quantum
No?
computing,
No.
because it's going to take jobs away from our children.
Well, we'll just put them on Minecraft to find more exploits. So it's...
No, we're sending them into mines, actually. That's what
Oh,
we're doing.
there's a smudge. Okay, no, I
Darker.
see that now. It's mines. Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of Coffee Talk.
Sure. Maybe for the last
We're going to
time.
leave it on a high note.
Yeah. And now, welcome to Whiskey Talk.
Yes.
You
Coffee
thought
Talk
this was
after
water.
dark. But on that note, Eva and I had a conversation earlier today, and I want to promote this too, because it's going to be the next Coffee Talk for the interview series. We talked all about stalkerware, which is a topic that I am very interested in and you're very knowledgeable about. We also talked about deepfakes and the future of deepfakes, especially with sextortion schemes, which are on the rise and very concerning. We talked about intimate privacy violations and broader privacy, which we touched on today. So really good conversation. I'm really excited to air that. This will be next Tuesday on Coffee Talk. 11 Pacific is when that airs. So yeah, next week we'll have that. Is there anything else we want to mention?
Well, and then you are interviewing Jake tomorrow as well, right?
Jake and I are going to hang out. We're going to sit and talk. What do you want to talk about? We'll talk about APT, DOD, and cults of personality.
Child mining.
Be
There we are.
trifecta.
There you go.
Yeah, awesome.
And that'll
Awesome.
come out in about a month.
Yeah,
good
and
with
then
that.
DEF CON, because that's only, 3 weeks away?
That is terrifying. But yes,
Yes.
that's
So
See,
we'll
it's
have-
all of us aside. We're just
body language.
Yeah, it's
Where
3
we'll be
weeks
coming
away.
back to
Yeah,
Vegas
Yeah,
in
exactly.
weeks.
Just trying it, rolling
Yeah.
out the room.
So stay tuned for that. And then
I'm super excited about DEF CON Black Hat, and I hope all of you are
Yes.
too.
Oh,
yeah.
Like
Yes.
the Flipper Zero Sphere CTF, I feel will be in full force by the time DEF CON rolls around. So I'm super excited to see
we're
that.
all counting on it. So.
I really am. I really am.
All right, and on that note, subscribe for Surge alerts, right? We also want to mention that.
Yeah,
Surge,
yeah.
Splunk.com/surge. You can
There we
sign
go.
up for our newsletter. We had to get that in. But yeah, that's all the time we have. Jake, Eva, thank you so much
Thanks for
coming on
hanging out.
Coffee Talk. It was
you.
great hearing from you and all the hot takes. Always appreciate it. And with that, we're just going to go ahead and take it away. Right, Ryan?
Where's Drew?
Absolutely.
Drew? Where's...